The house, my house, was beginning to breathe with the familiar spirit of Thanksgiving. It was a scent symphony composed over nearly 5 decades, a melody of memory and tradition. The rich, buttery aroma of the 25-pound turkey, which I had personally selected and seasoned at dawn, was the bass note, a deep, savory hum promising abundance. It mingled with the higher, sweeter notes of yams caramelizing in the oven, their sugary scent laced with cinnamon and a hint of nutmeg. On the stovetop, a pot of cranberries simmered, their tart fragrance cutting through the richness, a vibrant splash of crimson in the olfactory orchestra. This house, the one my late husband Walter and I had poured our life savings and our youthful dreams into, was more than just brick and mortar. Its very walls were saturated with these holidays, with the ghosts of laughter and the echoes of family. Walter always used to say that my cornbread stuffing was the true start of the season. Without it, Thanksgiving was just a Thursday with a big bird. I was standing at the worn butcher block island, crumbling the last of the golden cornbread into a large ceramic bowl, my mother's bowl, its glaze crazed with a fine web of age, when Kimberly made her entrance. Kimberly, my son Kevin's wife, did not simply enter a room. She conquered it. She was a vision in winter white trousers and a silk blouse the color of expensive champagne, an ensemble that looked more suited to a gallery opening than a family kitchen. Her presence was always crisp, modern, and utterly sterile, like the scent of a high-end cleaning product that promises to eliminate all traces of life. She radiated an aura of curated perfection that made my warm, lived-in kitchen feel suddenly inadequate and provincial. She paused in the doorway, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on the bowl in my hands. A minuscule, perfectly controlled frown line appeared between her professionally waxed eyebrows. "Beatrice, what on earth are you doing?" Her voice was a bright, brittle thing, stretched thin over a foundation of disapproval. "We talked about this. I told you. I have everything completely under control this year." She glided over to the refrigerator and gestured towards a stack of plastic containers. "My personal caterer is providing a wild mushroom and truffle stuffing with artisanal brioche. It's far more aligned with the palates of our guests." She pronounced artisanal with a reverence that bordered on religious, as if the word itself could sanctify the meal and absolve it of my folksy, traditional touch. I looked down at the fragrant, crumbly mound of cornbread, a recipe passed down from my grandmother, a recipe Walter had once declared should be patented. A familiar ache, dull and heavy, settled in my chest. "Oh," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the hum of the oven. "I just thought, it's what we've always had. Walter loved it." For the 5 years since Kevin had married Kimberly, and especially in the 3 years since they had moved in with me to help out after Walter's passing, my traditions had been systematically bulldozed. Our colorful, mismatched Christmas ornaments, each holding a specific memory, were replaced by cold, uniform silver orbs. Our plush, comfortable sofa, molded by years of family movie nights, was exiled to the basement in favor of a stiff, architectural gray monstrosity that was hostile to lounging. "We're just bringing the house into the 21st century, Bea," Kevin had explained, avoiding my eyes. But Kimberly's updates felt less like renovations and more like a hostile takeover. "Tradition is sweet, Beatrice, really," Kimberly said now, her smile a masterpiece of condescension that never once touched her cold, assessing eyes. "But the Caldwells are coming. Walter's old boss might have been fine with this." She waved a dismissive hand towards my bowl. "But Mr. Caldwell is the CEO. Kevin's entire career trajectory could be determined tonight. We need to project an image of success and sophistication." Without another word, she took the heavy ceramic bowl from my grasp. Her movements were smooth and decisive as she turned and scraped every last crumb of my history, my memories, into the garbage bin. The soft, dull thud of the cornbread hitting a bag of vegetable peels was the sound of my own heart dropping. I stood frozen, my hands still shaped around the ghost of the bowl, the scent of Walter's favorite stuffing, now mingling with the acrid smell of trash and Kimberly's expensive, cloying perfume. An hour later, the house was filled with the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell had arrived, a formidable couple who moved with the easy, understated confidence of old money and unquestioned authority. Kimberly was a whirlwind of practiced charm, her laughter tinkling at just the right moments, her hand guiding Mr. Caldwell to the most comfortable chair, her compliments to Mrs. Caldwell on her jewelry both effusive and, I was sure, meticulously researched. My son Kevin trailed in her wake like a nervous page boy, his smile tight, his eyes darting around the room, occasionally flicking towards me in my corner armchair with an expression of such profound, preemptive guilt that it was almost painful to witness. I had chosen my best dress for the occasion, a modest but elegant forest green cashmere dress that Walter had gifted me for our last anniversary together. I felt rooted in the chair, a piece of antique furniture myself, observing the performance from a distance. The performance was, of course, Kimberly's magnum opus, the perfect hostess in her perfect home. Finally, with a flourish, she clapped her hands together lightly. "Dinner is served. Please, everyone, come into the dining room. I hope you're all starving." The procession began. The dining room, my favorite room in the house, was breathtaking. The long, dark mahogany table, a wedding gift from my parents, was polished to a deep, liquid shine. It was set for 6 with Walter's mother's finest china, the plates rimmed with delicate gold leaf, and the heavy sterling silver that we reserved only for the most significant occasions. 12 crystal glasses shimmered under the warm golden light of the chandelier, which I had spent the morning cleaning and polishing. It was a tableau of timeless elegance, a legacy I was proud of. I rose from my armchair, my knees creaking slightly, and moved towards the dining room to take my customary seat. It was the chair at the head of the table, opposite the one Walter had always occupied. It was my throne, the one small piece of territory I had silently, stubbornly refused to cede to Kimberly's relentless modernization. But as I reached the archway, Kimberly materialized in front of me, a smiling human roadblock. She placed a manicured hand on my forearm, her touch as light and cool as a snowflake. "Beatrice, darling, just a moment," she murmured, her voice a conspiratorial whisper meant to sound like a shared secret. "I've set up a cozy little spot just for you, away from all this noise and chaos, where you can have some peace and enjoy your meal without being overwhelmed." She gestured not towards the gleaming candlelit table, but down the long, dim hallway leading towards the back of the house. And there, starkly illuminated by the unforgiving light of a bare ceiling fixture, was a folding card table. Its metal legs were slightly bent, causing it to wobble precariously on the polished hardwood floor. It was draped with a thin, disposable paper tablecloth printed with cartoonish turkeys. A single, mismatched plate from the everyday stoneware set, a flimsy paper napkin, and a fork and knife from the kitchen drawer completed the pathetic setting. A cold metal folding chair was tucked beneath it. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent gasp. My gaze traveled from the wretched little table back to Kimberly's perfectly composed face, my mind refusing to accept the calculated, deliberate nature of the insult. The happy sounds from the dining room, the laughter, the scraping of chairs, Mrs. Caldwell's delighted exclamation about the centerpiece seemed to be coming from miles away. "Kimberly, what is this?" I finally managed, the words catching in my throat. Her smile tightened, losing what little warmth it had. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss of pure, unadulterated steel. "We need the seats for our guests, Beatrice. Kevin needs this promotion. The main table is for people who matter tonight. You understand?" She patted my arm again, a gesture of finality. "Just be quiet and don't make a scene." I looked past her shoulder, through the archway, and saw my son, my Kevin. He was helping Mrs. Caldwell with her chair. He met my eyes for one fleeting, agonizing second. I saw the shame warring with his ambition, and I saw the ambition win. He dropped his gaze to the floor and began fussing with a water glass, his back turned squarely towards me. The words Kimberly had used, "guests only," reverberated in the hollow space where my heart had been. In the house Walter and I had built, at the table where I had served 1,000 meals, I was not family. I was not even a person. I was an embarrassment, a piece of clutter to be hidden in the hall. I sat. The cold metal of the folding chair seeped through my cashmere dress, a stark and unforgiving reality against my skin. From my lonely outpost in the hallway, I was an audience of one to a play in which I was not cast. I could see the animated gestures of the diners, the back of my son's head as he leaned in to listen to Mr. Caldwell, the elegant curve of Kimberly's neck as she threw her head back and laughed at something witty he'd said. Their world, just a dozen feet away, was a warm, glowing bubble of light, sound, and camaraderie. My world was the drafty hallway, the monotonous hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen, and the solemn, relentless ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Each tick was a hammer blow, marking another second of my profound and public humiliation. The initial shock had numbed me, but now a deep, chilling loneliness began to creep in, a loneliness far sharper and more personal than the grief I had felt since Walter's death. This was not an absence, it was an expulsion, a formal declaration of my own obsolescence, delivered by my own family. After an eternity that was probably no more than 15 minutes, Kimberly emerged from the dining room. She carried a plate, not with the grace of a hostess serving a guest, but with the perfunctory air of a warden delivering a ration. She set it down on the wobbly table with a clatter, not making eye contact. The plate was a portrait of neglect. One thin, dry-looking slice of turkey lay next to a small, pale scoop of her artisanal brioche stuffing. A thin, translucent film of gravy had been drizzled over it as an afterthought. It was the plate of a child being punished, the leftovers scraped together after the real feast had been enjoyed by others. I stared at the food, my stomach churning with a mixture of anger and sorrow. The glorious aromas that had filled me with such nostalgic joy only hours before now felt like a cruel taunt. The food held no appeal, it was merely evidence of the crime. I picked up the fork, the metal cool and cheap in my hand, and took a small bite of the stuffing. It was gummy, pretentious, and utterly soulless. It tasted of nothing. Or rather, it tasted of everything I had lost. It tasted like ashes. I could hear Mr. Caldwell's booming voice from the dining room. "Kimberly, my dear, this is absolutely first-rate, a truly magnificent meal. Kevin, you are a very, very lucky man." And I heard Kimberly's practiced self-deprecating reply. "Oh, it's nothing really. I just believe in the importance of making a house a true home. It's my passion." Making a house a home. The hypocrisy of the statement was a physical blow. This wasn't her house to make a home of. She hadn't spent sleepless nights in that living room, rocking a feverish Kevin, his small, hot head nestled in the crook of her arm. She hadn't planted the oak tree in the front yard with Walter on their first anniversary, its branches now scraping against the roof. She hadn't stood in this very hallway, tears of joy streaming down her face, when Walter had announced his first big promotion, the one that meant they could finally afford to start a family. She was the guest here, a long-term, overbearing, and profoundly ungrateful guest who was actively trying to gut the home of its soul. I pushed the plate away, my appetite annihilated. I listened as my son, my only child, let out a hollow, eager laugh at a joke Mr. Caldwell told. He was trading his mother's dignity for a rung on the corporate ladder. It was there, in the cold and the quiet, that the soft, forgiving part of my heart, the part that had made excuses for them for 3 long years, finally calcified into something hard and sharp. The grief for my husband was eclipsed by a new, more immediate grief for the son I no longer recognized. And in that cold, dark space, a new feeling was born, a quiet, unyielding, and crystal-clear resolve. They saw me as a weak, senile old woman, a problem to be managed. They had made a grave and soon-to-be costly miscalculation. The dinner party seemed to stretch into infinity. I heard the clinking of forks against dessert plates, some kind of pumpkin panna cotta, from the sounds of their praise. No one emerged from the warm bubble of the dining room to offer me a portion. I remained at my card table, a silent statue of familial rejection. The initial fiery humiliation had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, dense core of fury in my chest. I had transcended tears. This was an injury too profound for such a simple release. I simply sat, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and I observed. I watched them all, like a scientist studying a foreign species. I watched their gestures, their false laughter, their sycophantic dance of ambition. I saw everything. Finally, the evening drew to a close. The Caldwells rose to leave, swaddled in their cashmere coats and polite platitudes. Kevin and Kimberly escorted them to the front door. A flurry of "so good to see yous" and "we absolutely must do this again." They walked right past me, their stream of conversation parting around my chair as if I were a piece of furniture, a hat stand they had to navigate on their way to the door. I had been rendered utterly invisible. After the heavy front door clicked shut, sealing out the cold November night, Kevin let out a long, weary sigh. He sagged against the wall, loosening the knot of his expensive silk tie as if it were a noose. Kimberly, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with triumphant energy, her face flushed with the thrill of a successful social campaign. "That could not have gone better," she announced, her voice ringing with satisfaction as she began collecting empty glasses from the living room coffee table. "Caldwell adores me. He practically offered you that promotion on the spot, Kevin. I sealed the deal tonight." It was only then that Kevin's gaze found me, still seated at my miserable little table in the hall. His eyes were a turbulent mix of shame, defensiveness, and a desperate plea for understanding. He couldn't hold my gaze. "B," he began, his voice low and strained, a coward's mumble. I hope you're not upset. She gets very stressed when she's hosting. She wanted everything to be absolutely perfect." I met his pathetic excuse with a wall of silence. My face was a placid, unreadable mask. I would not grant him the relief of an argument, nor the absolution of my forgiveness. I just stared, my silence a mirror reflecting his own cowardice back at him. Let him sit with it. Let him squirm in the chasm between the man he was and the man his father had raised him to be. Kimberly bustled past us then, her arms laden with dirty dessert plates, blissfully unaware of or indifferent to the tense tableau in the hallway. "Kevin, for heaven's sake, don't just stand there gawking," she commanded, her tone that of a busy executive addressing a slacking intern. "Start clearing the dining room. I can't bear to wake up to a messy house." He flinched, his head whipping back and forth for a split second, caught between his wife's command and his mother's silent judgment. He chose his wife. With one final, fleeting glance of apology that was so weak it felt like another insult, he turned his back on me and shuffled into the dining room. I was alone again, the card table and folding chair standing as the official monument to my exile. I listened to them in the kitchen, the sounds of their partnership filling the house, the sharp clatter of my mother-in-law's china being stacked carelessly, the rush of the faucet, their low, satisfied murmurs. They were cleansing my home of their triumph, re-establishing their dominion. As I finally rose to my feet, my old joints protesting, and walked slowly towards my bedroom, I had to pass the kitchen doorway. Neither of them looked up from their work. I was a ghost in my own home. As I closed my bedroom door, the soft click of the latch sounded like the cocking of a pistol. Their reign was over. They just didn't know it yet. Sleep was a distant country I could not reach. I lay awake in the encompassing darkness of my bedroom, the familiar weight of Walter's old quilt doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting long skeletal shadows on the wall that seemed to point and accuse. The evening's events played on a relentless, cruel loop in my mind. Kimberly's voice, dripping with false concern as she led me to the hallway, the sight of that flimsy card table, a stark symbol of my worth in their eyes, the image of Kevin's averted face, a portrait of spineless ambition. The phrase "guests only" echoed in the silence, each repetition chipping away at the foundation of love and memory I thought my family was built upon. This was so much more than a ruined holiday. It was a methodical, soul-crushing campaign to erase me. They were treating me like a senile dependent, a burden whose comfort was secondary to their social climbing. They had mistaken my quiet grief for weakness, my gentle nature for capitulation. My gaze fell upon the silver-framed photograph on my nightstand. It was a picture of Walter and me on the day we'd bought this house, nearly 50 years ago. We were so young, standing on the porch of the empty house, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, our faces alight with a mixture of terror and exhilarating hope. I remembered something he'd said to me near the end, when his voice was a weak rasp, but his eyes were still full of fire. He had gripped my hand, his knuckles bony but his grasp surprisingly strong. "B," he'd whispered. "This house, it's our fortress. We built it wall by wall, memory by memory. After I'm gone, it's your castle. Don't you ever, for 1 second, let anyone make you feel like a servant in it. You are the queen of this castle, always." His words, once a tender comfort for my impending grief, now ignited a fire within me. They were a charge, a royal decree from a departed king. A queen does not take her meals in the corridor. A queen does not allow her history to be thrown in the trash. And a queen, above all, does not suffer traitors to live within her walls. A plan, cold and precise, began to assemble itself in my mind. It was not a plan born of petty spite, but of righteous, sovereign necessity. This was about reclaiming my home, my dignity, and the sacred trust Walter had placed in me. I would not descend into hysterics. I would not scream or rage. That was the role they had cast for me, the emotional, irrational old woman. My response would be the opposite. It would be quiet, it would be legal, and it would be absolute. They had redefined our relationship. I was no longer a mother and a matriarch. I was a proprietor, and they were merely tenants, guests, and guests, by definition, can be asked to leave. I pushed back the heavy quilt and swung my feet to the floor. I walked over to the antique secretary desk where Walter had always kept our important papers. From the bottom drawer I retrieved a thick, worn accordion file. Inside, nestled amongst old warranties and insurance policies, was the deed to the house. I ran my finger over the official embossed seal, and then over my name, printed in stark, irrefutable black ink. Beatrice Annabelle Peterson, sole owner. I then found the file of property tax statements, stretching back decades, all paid from the joint account Walter and I had so carefully built, and now from the survivors' benefits and savings that were mine alone. They lived here on my generosity, a fact they had conveniently forgotten. My hand trembled, but this time with purpose, as I found a pen and a notepad. I looked up the number for a business I had seen advertised in the local paper. Patriot Lock Services, securing your freedom, 24 hours. I wrote it down. Walter had called this place a fortress. It was time to pull up the drawbridge and bar the gates. The following morning, I rose before the sun, as was my habit. The house was shrouded in a deep pre-dawn silence. I moved through the familiar rooms with a newfound purpose. I did not start the large coffee percolator, an appliance whose gurgling noises usually served as the house's gentle alarm clock. I did not squeeze fresh orange juice. I did not put bread in the toaster. The days of me serving as their unpaid short-order cook were over. Let them fend for themselves. Around 9:30, I heard stirring from their upstairs bedroom, followed by the bright, jarring sound of Kimberly's voice. "Kevin, hurry up! The Black Friday doorbusters at the mall start in 30 minutes. That Italian leather handbag I showed you is 50% off." The casual, unthinking consumerism, the immediate pivot from profound cruelty to shallow acquisition, was the final, resounding confirmation of my decision. Their souls were empty, and they were trying to fill the void with things they kept in my house. They clattered down the stairs a short while later, dressed for a day of competitive shopping. "Bye, Bee," Kevin called out as they rushed past the living room, a hollow, automatic gesture. Kimberly didn't even bother with that. The moment the sound of their car's engine faded down the street, I walked to the telephone on the hall table. My hand was as steady as a surgeon's as I dialed the number for Patriot Lock Services. "Good morning," I said, my voice resonating with a clarity and authority that surprised even me. "My name is Beatrice Peterson. I am the owner of the property at 112 Oak Lane. I require a locksmith to come and change every single external lock on the premises." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Yes, ma'am. Is this an emergency situation?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," I replied. "I believe it is. A matter of security. I need it done today, as soon as possible." Less than an hour later, a clean white van with a discreet American flag logo pulled into my driveway. A polite, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with kind, perceptive eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache stood on my porch. His name tag read Paul. "Mrs. Peterson?" he asked, holding a heavy-duty toolbox. "You called about a full rekey?" "Yes, Paul, I did," I said, stepping back to grant him entry. "I'm the homeowner. I've recently become concerned about who might have access to my property. It's time for a security upgrade." Paul gave a slow, understanding nod. His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet professionalism that told me he had seen this drama play out in 100 different homes. He was a silent witness to familial fractures and broken trust. For the next 2 hours, the quiet house was filled with the decisive sounds of reclamation, the high-pitched whine of a power drill unscrewing old fixtures, the metallic rasp of old lock sets being pried from their housings, the satisfying click and whir of new high-security tumblers being installed. With each lock that Paul removed, the old tarnished brass fixtures that Kimberly and Kevin had keys to, I felt a layer of grime being scraped from my soul. He dropped the old locks into a cardboard box with a dismissive thud. In their place, he installed gleaming, brushed nickel deadbolts, their formidable size a clear statement of intent. When he was finished with the final door, he gathered the old hardware and presented me with a small, heavy ring holding 3 shiny new keys. They felt cool and substantial in my palm, like instruments of power. "All set, Mrs. Peterson," he said, handing me the invoice. "Nobody is getting through these without one of these new keys. You can rest easy." I paid him in cash from a small emergency fund Walter had always insisted I keep, and I added a $50 bill as a tip. "Thank you for your prompt and discreet service, Paul," I said. He simply tipped his cap. "That's what we're here for, ma'am." After he drove away, I walked to my new front door. I turned the thumb turn on the deadbolt. The bolt shot home with a solid, definitive thunk that echoed through the silent house. It was the sound of a gate clanging shut, the sound of a fortress being secured. Late afternoon sunlight, weak and golden, was slanting through the living room windows. I was settled in my favorite wingback chair, the one with the fabric worn soft over the years, a cup of Earl Grey steaming on the small table beside me. I was reading a biography of Catherine the Great, a woman who certainly never ate at a card table in a hallway. The house was mine again. The silence was not empty. It was serene. It was the sound of peace. Then I heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Their car. I heard doors slam, followed by the sounds of their footsteps on the porch, laden with the rustle of shopping bags. Then came the familiar jingle of Kevin's keychain, followed by the scrape of a key being pushed into the new lock. A frustrated jiggle, a pause filled with confusion, another, more aggressive attempt to force the key to turn. "What in God's name?" I heard Kimberly exclaim, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Kevin, your key is broken, it won't go in." "That's impossible, it's the same key I've used for 3 years," his voice replied, laced with bewilderment. "Let me try." More scraping, more frantic jiggling. A loud, frustrated grunt. "It's stuck! Something's wrong with the lock!" Then came the knocking. It began as a polite, questioning rap, rap, rap. When I remained silent, it escalated into a more demanding, insistent banging against the solid oak door. "Beatrice!" Kimberly's voice was now a shrill command, stripped of all its social graces. "Beatrice, open this door right now! What did you do to the lock?" I took another slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the fragrant steam wash over my face. I let them bang for another 60 seconds, imagining their faces contorting with a mixture of anger and dawning panic. Finally, I set my book aside, marking my page with a ribbon. I rose slowly, my movements unhurried, and walked to the door. I did not open it. I leaned my head close to the cool wood, my voice calm and clear, projecting just enough to be heard clearly on the other side. "Who is it?" A moment of pure, unadulterated shock met my question. The banging ceased abruptly. I could picture them on the porch, staring at the door in stunned disbelief. "Who is it?" Kimberly shrieked, her voice cracking. "Who do you think it is, you senile old bat? It's Kevin and me, your family. Open this door." I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," I replied, my tone one of polite confusion. "There must be some mistake. I wasn't expecting any guests this afternoon." The word guests hung in the air between us. A perfectly aimed and poisoned dart. It landed with devastating precision. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Kimberly. "Mom?" Kevin's voice was now small and pleading, the bluster gone, replaced by a note of genuine fear. "Mom, what's going on? This isn't funny. Please, it's getting cold. Let us in." "Oh, I assure you, I am not joking, Kevin," I said, my voice as firm and unyielding as the new steel bolt securing the door. Kimberly was exceptionally clear about the house rules yesterday. The main areas of the home are for residents only. Guests are to be kept separate. And as we all know, guests can't simply come and go at their leisure. They certainly don't have their own keys. I heard the rustle and thud of shopping bags being dropped onto the porch floor. The game was over, and the reality of their new situation was crashing down upon them. "Mom, please," Kevin begged, his voice cracking. "This is our home. We live here." "No, Kevin," I said, my voice cold and final. "You lived here. I live here. And I've decided I no longer wish to have long-term guests." After several more minutes of their incoherent sputtering, a desperate cocktail of Kevin's pleading and Kimberly's vitriolic insults, I decided the lesson had been sufficiently delivered. I slid the heavy brass chain lock into its track, a final layer of security, and opened the door a mere 4 inches. It was enough. I could see them clearly, framed in the narrow opening like a tragic portrait of entitlement denied. They stood amidst a sea of glossy shopping bags from high-end stores, their prizes from the day now looking like sad, useless trophies. Kimberly's perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, and her face was blotchy with rage. Kevin just looked hollowed out, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You will have exactly 1 hour," I announced, my voice quiet but carrying the undisputed weight of law. "I will permit you to enter, one at a time, to pack 1 suitcase each with your essential clothing and toiletries. You may contact me tomorrow to schedule an appointment to retrieve the rest of your possessions. You will do so under my direct supervision." Kimberly's jaw worked silently for a moment before she found her voice. "You can't do this," she hissed, her face contorted with fury. "This is our home. We have rights." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Do you, Kimberly? I would love to see your name on the deed. Or perhaps you can show me the property tax checks you've written for the past 3 years. Or the receipts for the mortgage payments that were paid in full by my husband and me, a decade before you even met my son. You are a guest. And your checkout time was yesterday afternoon when you sat me in a hallway." My gaze then shifted to my son. The anger I felt for him was a different creature entirely, a thing of deep, profound sorrow. "And you, Kevin," I said, my voice softening not with forgiveness, but with a clinical pity. "You stood by. You watched your wife humiliate your mother in the home your father and I built with our own 2 hands. You traded my dignity for a pat on the head from your boss. I hope for your sake that the promotion is everything you dreamed it would be, because it has cost you your family." He flinched, as if I had struck him, his eyes finally fixing on the worn floorboards of the porch, unable to bear the weight of my gaze. The hour that followed was a tense, silent affair. They entered one by one, their movements stiff with anger and humiliation, and emerged with their suitcases. I stood sentinel in the living room, watching their every move. I watched them load their bags into the trunk of their expensive sedan. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't speak to me. When they were finished, they got into the car and drove away, not even a backward glance in the rearview mirror. The silence that descended in their wake was immense. It was the vast, echoing silence of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped. But it was not an empty silence. It was a silence filled with peace, with ownership, with the return of order. I walked into the dining room and ran my hand along the smooth, cool surface of the mahogany table. My table. I pulled out my chair, the one at the head, and sat down, surveying the room. The house seemed to exhale alongside me, its spirit settling, its integrity restored. The coming days and weeks would be lonely. I knew that. The wound in my heart where my son used to be would take a long time to heal, if it ever did. But it would be a loneliness of my own choosing, a solitude defined by dignity, not by shame. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and hidden away. But a queen, no matter how quiet her reign, knows how to defend her castle. And that night, for the first time in 3 long years, I slept through the night in my own bed, the absolute and sovereign ruler of my quiet, peaceful kingdom.